That's good. Yeah, that's fine. Use I'm sharing today. Got two. We're good to start. Perfect. Okay. Hello everybody. Welcome to round 4 of the NZIER New Zealand Schools Debating Championships. My name is Isabel. I'm going to be your chair for this evening. My pronouns are she, her. The motion for this round is that we would permanently abolish the Olympics. So I hope we're all really excited to get that underway. Speaking times are 1 to 8 minutes, or just 8 minutes. I'm going to be clapping once at 1 minute, once at 7 minutes, twice at 8 minutes, and 3 times at 8 minutes and 10 seconds. Please start talking after 8 minutes. I will clap through you. Our reply speech is going to be 4 minutes. I will clap once at 3 minutes and twice at 4 minutes. But before we get going, I'll get the judges to introduce themselves to us, and then we'll go in speaking order in F and then Meg, and feel free to introduce your pronouns or not, what you're comfortable on. Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Can I remember that I'm speaking? I like to use shaking pronouns.
Hi, I'm Siobhan, she, her.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Stephen.
Hi, I'm Guy Peter. Hi, I'm Valentino Keegan.
Hi, I'm Ellen, she, her.
Hi, I'm Claudia, she, her.
I'm Stephen.
And
Wonderful. Cool. Looks like we're all ready to go. Just checking everyone consents to live streaming. Yeah, wonderful. Okay. Well, without further ado, I invite the first speaker of the affirmative team to open his team's case.
The main problem with the Olympics is that a few weeks of foreign tourists coming in is never going to be able to make up for the billions and billions of dollars spent over the years that are necessarily required to host those Olympic Games. Local communities are decimated on their side of the house because they're not given the investment they actually need in things like health and things like education. We say enough is enough, abolish these Olympics. What's our stance? 2 things. Firstly, like intuitively, the abolishing of both the summer and winter Olympics. Secondly, we just say in place of this, what we're likely to see is things like the Rugby World Cup, like other World Cups which are specific to sports, still being able to be hosted around the world, so you can get that specific engagement there on those like uni sport events. Our burden of this debate today is to show that the leaders of these countries act out of their population's best interest to host these games, therefore hurting these vulnerable local communities. 4 arguments. First, why countries act out of their own interest to host these Olympics. Secondly, why hosting these Olympics are so harmful. Thirdly, just about how we best promote emerging sports on our side of the house. And Valentino will split to you about how why Olympic bids are solely performative. Okay, starting off on this first argument, about why countries act out of their own interests to host the Olympics. The starting point for this is that if they knowingly make a bad decision for their local populations, that's really harmful. We don't think that they should be able to make that decision for 2 reasons. First, we just know you think that it's immense coercion and conflated expectations with these Olympics. But secondly, we tell you that the leaders of these countries often don't act in the best interest. They're often more authoritarian, and they just want the Olympics as a distraction. 6 reasons why they're always going to act out of their own interests to host those Olympics. First, the Olympics is an international institution, offer a sense of legitimacy because of the tradition that's gone on. That's really important for like developing countries with more authoritarian leaders, like Brazil, because they want that international like recognition. They want that sense that they're a good actor on the world stage. Therefore, like there's an immense incentive for them to host those Olympics, even though they might devastate local populations. Secondly, we tell you that like those projected revenues from these like Olympics are like initially going to be really good because of like countries have biases and they think, oh, they like Rio's it was really bad for Rio in the past, it was really bad in Tokyo, but no, we're going to be different, we're going to do it the best way possible. They always like that means that they're not actually able to like weigh up the cost benefits of hosting these Olympics are like in an actual way because they're biased and they think they are able to do it better than others. So they often think these Olympics are going to like result in long-term flow-on effects and things like tourism. That doesn't happen because it doesn't actually remove the structural barriers to tourism that exist in a lot of these places. Like people don't want to go to Brazil, not because they don't know about Brazil, but because they have like fears about like corruption, political instability, it being unsafe for them. You don't actually change any of those things if you have that Olympics. That's still really harmful. Fourthly, we tell you that these decision makers are going to be really privileged because they're like right at the top of that society. That means they're not going to prioritize to the same degree like the implications that this policy has for poor people because they're not in that position. And a lot of institutions, that where there is corruption like, around the world, they're not necessarily accountable to those poor people. Finally, like fifthly here, we tell you that this like bidding process is necessarily non-democratic and that they go into these back rooms and they make the deals with the IOC. That's really bad because you don't get that accountability, even in a democracy, throughout that process. You're not able to properly like regulate that. The government's just going on there and making that decision. But finally, perhaps most importantly, the Olympics are a really good tool for regimes to use to distract from other failures. That's what you look like in things like Brazil, where you kind of like, oh, we're going to have this great flashy Olympic Games, like distract from the fact that we can't put textbooks in classrooms to try and placate the masses. That like diversion of attention is really important. What's the outcome of this? Firstly, the countries like necessarily act out their own best interest to participate and to host these, and like secondly, it distracts from these more pressing issues, which means you don't get action on health, you don't get action on things like education. Okay, at the end of this point, you can see why I've shown that it's not a like valid choice for these nations to make, and therefore it like necessitates this abolishment. It's not going to be like good enough for first me to like come up here and assert that like, oh, if these Olympics are so harmful, then I'm going to do them anyway. Because we've given you all those reasons about why like they're going to act out their best interests. Okay, now on to why hosting these Olympics is so bad. The starting point to this is that this is like all these unique to the Olympics. 3 reasons. Firstly, the Olympics necessarily comprises all sports. That means like you're not just going to have a rugby match, you have to build specialized facilities, like things for equestrian, things for swimming sports, things for like track and field. That's like necessitates a lot of investment over a wide variety of things. Secondly, we just tell you the international prestige is a huge pull factor towards these Olympics. And thirdly, just the scale. Like the Rugby World Cup, like is never going to be like as on a bigger scale as the Olympics. It's never going to have to necessitate that same thing. Okay. 6 reasons why this the Olympics is bad. First, we tell you the bidding process, because it's undemocratic and untransparent, is really like corrupt, and therefore you're going to have to pay a high price. That's really like bad in this debate, because you're starting off like in an elevated situation with indebtedness, and so you're not going to be able to get maximum that. Secondly, we just tell you that this infrastructure is going to sit like unused. Where you construct all this like niche infrastructure for the Olympics, that means that it wasn't there in the first place. That means that like after the 3 weeks are over, then you're going like it's going to sit empty. This means that like a lot of it is financed by debt, so that's really harmful. But they don't actually have the like resources to properly maintain these facilities. So even if they could use them in the future, they're going to fall into a state of disrepair, so they're not going to be able to get that. Okay. Thirdly, we just tell you the IOC has immense power here in terms of like dictating what these games look like. It looks like the IOC telling Japan they have to go ahead with the games, otherwise it's going to fine them. Countries have no like agency here. Fourthly, we just tell you that even if benefits do accrue, these tend to be wealthy individuals because the investments tend to be going to happen in wealthy areas. That means you don't get like the middle classes up. That's really important. Fifthly, we just tell you about the cancellation risk. Like COVID literally means that all this investment could literally be for nothing, just like in Japan. That's really harmful because when you spend tens of billions of dollars building this infrastructure, if the event never happens, that's a huge harm. That's six. We just tell you that if you just think of to outdo other countries, I'll take POI after as well.
How do you explain the fact that some Olympic studies were reused from previous events?
We just tell you that like this doesn't really happen. Like we point to things like Brazil, where they're falling into states of disrepair. We don't think that like Olympics, people like we don't think these Olympics are going to be like repeated in the same places. That's like not necessarily outcomes. Okay, the outcomes of this, if you get bad economic outcomes for local populations, that's really important to make sure they consider the most vulnerable people, because there's this huge opportunity cost there. And that money should be going to health and education, but it's not, it's going towards the state. Thirdly, on this point about how to promote emerging sports. Starting with this is that emerging sports need help. 2 reasons. Firstly, not many people know about them, and diversity in sports is really important. Okay, why don't we get the promotion in emerging sports under the IOC? Firstly, the IOC dictates rules and regulations around these sports, so they have to say and they can't adapt in the way that cricket has in order to reach a bigger audience. Secondly, you're actively competing with other sports to the point at which you're against that IOC. You're can carve out your own lane, just like cricket has with T20 stuff. Thirdly, you say that host countries are more enthusiastic and it's only one sport being focused on. That means these games are going to be better. Fourthly, we just tell you that these sports can be seen as less in comparison to other sports because they're scheduling things that no one's really going to be watching. The coverage is not going to be as good. But finally, we just tell you that these minor sports don't at the point at which these minor sports need that move from the IOC, will just be seen as legitimate. That's really bad. The outcomes of this is you get bad outcomes for talented sports people. You're not able to inspire that future generation. We need to propose.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and I invite the first speaker of the negating team to begin her team's case.
Nothing like the Olympics. It is without a doubt the most important global sporting event, if not the most important global event overall. Abolishing the Olympics would mean losing the unique cultural, social, and economic benefits it brings to millions and billions of people. Today, we bring you 3 measure points as to why to keep the Olympics around. Firstly, the Olympics generate huge economic benefits for hosting countries. Secondly, the Olympics has unique benefits unlike other sporting events. And further, our second speaker will go into thirdly, how the Olympics is good for competitors and viewers. To win this debate, we will prove to you the significance of the Olympics and its unique benefits as a direct result of this. Most of my rebuttals are produced in the nation this debate. Most of my rebuttals can be brought up during my self-signed material, which I will link to what the other side has said. However, there are a couple of ones that I will go into now as direct rebuttals. So firstly, they talk about the Olympics being done out of self-interest in countries. First, we kind of question the logic of this. We haven't really seen this happening very much due to the countries that are bidding to participate in the Olympics. But even if it was, they're still bringing huge benefits, which I'm going to assume about. If you're still bringing economic benefits for especially tourists, which are, for locals, which I'll especially go into in a moment, then that's kind of irregardless of the incentive of it being done. They also talk about bringing up niche sports into the spotlight and how somehow they think that smaller sporting events will be able to do this. This actually goes against their case because the Olympics is able to bring out more niche sports to the spotlight. They actually have the capabilities to bring out more niche sports that probably don't have as much funding as the biggest ones like football and I don't know, I'm not really a sports person, rugby, you know the sports. The Olympics actually do have the resource and capability to bring these ones to the spotlight with the huge global international scale of people actually tuning in to watch the Olympics. The opposing team seems to neglect this and thinks that it helps their case, and actually it harms it directly. So going into our substantive material. Firstly, the Olympics generate huge economic benefits for hosting countries, which actually directly goes against what the opposition team says about it being economically harmful. For both well-developed and underdeveloped countries, hosting Olympics reaps large profits due to the mass tourist attraction and stability. By hosting the Olympics, countries get a mass flow of tourists coming to the game and spending the money on local accommodation, food, transport, experiences, and souvenirs. Local businesses especially benefit and thrive from their country hosting the Olympics because of this influx in tourism. The economic benefit for hosting countries works on 5 major levels. Firstly, the number of visitors increases due to watching the Olympics. There's more money for local business, so people actually go to watch the Olympics in person. This is especially important for countries in more poverty, who don't otherwise get this opportunity. Maybe they have such tourist attraction, whereas if they're hosting the Olympics, they get this big mass attraction because of the integration of Olympics and society, which will also be brought up again later in my speech. Secondly, you get more tax income because of the income tax and duties and services or products are provided at the Olympics and the surrounding areas where tourists spend much of their time. This income leads to social improvements unique to our side of the house, and it improves people's lives by helping put more money to social services like health and social welfare and actually well-being. And the opposition team had claimed that actually it hurt people's well-being. Well, actually, I tell you, this revenue don't help you because the funding from the Olympics can be put into that, and that's actually what we've seen has been done in countries, especially more underdeveloped ones that do it in the Olympics. Thirdly, publicity for the Olympics promotes tourism, and more people come to these countries, not only reaping the short-term economic prosperity, but also proving the long-term economic benefits. The opposing team said that they don't get long-term profits because it's apparently only a few weeks of people coming to spend their money. Well, actually, we're going to tell you why they actually bring long-term benefits. This is because this works because with the public attraction and masses of tourists, people experience the tourist attractions in the country. They may have not been incentivized to use it before if it wasn't for the Olympics. Without the relevant attraction of the Olympics, and is well integrated in society, then coming back to these countries in the future. And also, it's been publicized on a worldwide scale. People are able to see these countries host the Olympics, and they have more incentive to actually go there to these countries. So they reap long-term benefits with people being there, enjoy the experience, and they're more likely to come back there. The Olympics provides a direct incentive for them to do this. So we actually go against what them saying it's short-term benefits, and actually this is long-term economic benefits. It's also long-term economic benefits, as we just talked about with the tax code. Fourthly, building stadiums can be reused for future sporting events. This is pretty self-explanatory, but regardless, they bring up points that, oh no, they don't reuse it. Well, actually, they do. They did this in the UK, and they did this in Tokyo with their big stadium. Also, it's very easy for countries to reuse their stadiums. They have a big incentive to because it's very good because if you ever to move more sporting events in these already built infrastructures, which you've already profited from, which is a really great thing, you can actually invest in having more sporting events in that area, which is really great. Countries can quite easily do this, and the ones that don't, I mean, it's still pretty easy for them to do so. They just need to make that choice and that jump. And fifthly, investing in hosting Olympics is stable and predicting in profit, which is something that we really want to nail in today, is because it is of the integration of the Olympics being historically and culturally important event, making it a timeless event, and further, the track record of tourism attraction results in much profit. This is a stable investment for countries to make that practically guarantees profitability. On our second major substandard, the Olympics has unique benefits unlike other sporting events. We've gone into it a little bit more, but we'll give you some more now. The Olympics has the most participating countries out of any sporting event in the world, and due to popularity, international inclusivity, and cultural impact, it reaps unique benefits. We bring you 3 major reasons as to why and how the Olympics achieve this. Firstly, no other international event brings together so many participating countries such as the Olympics. This is especially important for less economically developed countries, such as those in Africa and the Pacific, because there's no event on this scale that they are able to compete in, because most of events only include wealthy countries and the countries surrounding the wealthy countries, meaning less economically developed countries miss out on the opportunities if the Olympics was abolished. Thirdly, the Olympics allow countries to get on well with each other better than any other global event or organization. This promotes goodwill between people because they see their leading teams getting on the Olympics and will therefore put pressure on their governments at home to make better and reciprocal with the other countries. For example, we've seen this with North and South Korea countries together at the Olympics in 2018. And before I finish, I think we're going to take a
If the economic benefits are so great, why were there millions of people in the streets of Rio de Janeiro protesting about the 2016 Olympics?
Okay, this is quite a one-off benefit. I can't tell you all about specifically Rio, but we've seen so many benefits of the Olympics for many countries, and often you can't say this is completely contingent on that particular Olympics in Rio. And in fact, we've told you about places like the UK, places like Tokyo, places like Brazil that have found huge economic benefits when they actually haven't been able to get this before. We've told you about the incentive for people for tourism. We've given you all a mechanism as to how and why this works, something that the opposing team has not done. At the end of this debate, we proved you the unique and prosperous social, economic, and cultural benefits of the Olympics, only to be greatly achieved under our side of the house. Proud to negate.
Wonderful. I thank the speaker for her speech, and I invite the second speaker of the affirmative team to continue his team's case.
The Olympics is not a system of economic growth for the poor. It's not a system in which countries that have to build tons of infrastructure, like Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, actually benefit, right? So when they want to focus on cases like the UK, when they want to focus on cases like Tokyo, where all the pre-existing infrastructure exists, we say that's great. But they need to tell us why it's really worth the risk when we tell you that there are so many alternatives to the Olympics, right? When you can have global events for specific sports, right? They were never really willing to compare with all of this, and we'll show you why this is so essential in this debate. So, what do you think the major issues are? First of all, how this affects the economy. We think that's a major clash. Second of all, how this affects the growth of minor sports. And then I'll split and tell you why the Olympic bids are solely performative, right? So firstly, let's talk about economic benefits. Because realize that all the examples that they wanted to give you are of these rich developed nations that already have all this infrastructure, right? Who are actually benefiting. What this means is that in the best case scenario where they do get economic benefits, all that occurs is that they're taking money away from other nations and funneling it into richer nations which actually have the infrastructure, right? This means that when poorer nations want to take advantage of such a system and look towards this, like we saw in Brazil, we get a situation where they end up failing, right? Where they end up just covering up all their flaws, where they have a situation where they have to rebuild, where they have to build all these buildings that go unused, right? So when they come up and tell us that, oh, it's easy, just use the building that you built. No, because these buildings require upkeep, because they require renovation, right? We think that this costs hundreds of thousands of dollars each and every year. And when you are building these for sports that are not regularly played within your country, that's when the economic problems start, right? That's when you've wasted millions of dollars into these investments for things that don't really benefit the people. Now, then they tell us about how this benefits local businesses. But as we have seen time and again, when governments are willing to churn out the thousands and millions of dollars to bid for the Olympics, they're not going to think about putting this in some isolated rural area in the country to benefit the local people on the ground. They're putting this in the middle of the city with all the rich international chains, where all your business friends are, where all the rich are, right? Because that's where where the country ends up making the most money. That's where we think cronyism ultimately benefits, where we see things like corruption are essentially rampant throughout most economies, and we think especially in cases of like minor economies like Brazil, right? So we don't think that there are these situations where this benefits local businesses, or if it does, it's to a very minor extent, and it's not as much as the cost that this has on like the economic system as a whole when you have to spend taxpayer revenue to build all these things. But lastly, it's on the issue of tourism, right? Because we've told you that there are structural reasons as to why there isn't tourism under the current situation, right? They wanted to tell you that people come to these countries, they see it's beautiful, and therefore they come back again. we don't think that people generally go to the same country again and again to tour there, right? We think that you can see the Eiffel Tower one time and you're pretty satisfied with that. But also on the second level, we think that even if there are people who like haven't experienced this and see it through the Olympics, we think that ultimately the Olympics is all about the fanfare in the moment, right? We don't think that there are long-term benefits. We think the benefits are very short-term in terms of the individuals coming there in the moment, right? So we think that if a country is really doing this to boost tourism, then they have larger problems, right? They don't have enough tourist attractions. They aren't attracting people well enough. There might be safety issues, like we see in Brazil, right? So we think that that is a fundamental problem, right? But secondly, let's go into the major issue of growth of minor sports, right? Because we have told you that the Olympics ultimately limits the ability of these sports to grow, right? And yes, I tried to come out and say, but oh, we actually give minor sports all this attention, right? What attention are you getting when these minor sports are put in between basketball and football, right? When you have discus being played in between while they're setting up for the next major sports, right? We don't see discus or like pole vault as like the first opening event of the Olympic Games, right? And that's for a reason. It's because the Olympics knows that these aren't the major sports, right? The only reason that this gets any form of attention is because of like some degree of national pride. What we tell you is that the Olympics ultimately limits the ability of these sports to grow and ultimately keeps these sports in the category of minor sports, right? But as we give you the example of cricket, what occurs is that when you remove yourself from this old archaic system of the Olympics and all their structures, what you have is a situation where sports are able to evolve, right? When they're actually competing with media attention with other sports, you get what cricket did, right? Where you go from week-long matches that nobody wanted to watch and everybody tuned out of to 3-hour matches like you have in T20, right? That's when you actually get public attention. That's when sports start evolving, right? That's when sports actually become palatable to the public, and the participants of these sports are able to actually get like living wages and have like more fulfilling careers when they don't have one event defining their entire lives, right? Which we also think is fundamentally problematic, right? Because if you get injured before an Olympics at the peak of your career, we think this ultimately means that you are inherently limited, right? Whereas if we had a system where you had a more regular like yearly schedule for you to play the sports in a sort of World Cup, we think that this is ultimately just more accessible for many individuals, right? So we think that all this goes aside. Also, just on a minor note, they mentioned this weird throwaway point about like goodwill. First of all, we have no clue why they suddenly improve relations between North and South Korea when one's party news and the other, right? We don't think that this changes anything. So I'll go into a bit about why Olympic events are solely performative, but before that, come on.
Don't you believe that the people in North and South Korea would see that the Olympics can be more of a sporting event?
Yes, like 50 years of civil war is clearly gonna just like fade away after playing ice hockey together one time. Like, let's be realistic about this, right? We don't think that this is like some sort of fairy tale where you play sports together, you win a tournament, and then suddenly like all the political tensions disappear, right? Come on, there's large structural reasons that's stupid. So why the Olympic Games are solely performative, right? Recognize that the reason countries hold the Olympics is not because of like goodwill for the sport. We recognize that it's ultimately because they recognize that there's a wound within the economy that they want to conceal, right? And we've told you about this from first, right? We told you that this is essentially a way to distract the people from the issues within your country, right? But it's also a way to distract foreign powers from the issues within your country, right? Which is why we see like future Olympic bids from China, right? Because they want to host the invasion to draw you away from all the atrocities, to highlight all the like the beauty of their world, right? Which is why you see like in previous sporting events, China just like seeds the clouds and makes it rain so they can get rid of the issue of pollution, right? To make their country look more beautiful, right? So that they can avoid all the negative press and make it seem like all an illusion in this short few weeks span in which they have to appeal to the world, right? We think ultimately the Olympics is this performance, right? That's why there's a big opening show in places like Rio de Janeiro where they bring like the carnival in and all these sorts of things, right? It's not there so that they can please the people. It's there so they can please the international community and show a sort of superiority in the world, right? That's why Russia was willing to dope during an Olympics, just because they wanted to win and show that they had a sort of national dominance, that they had a sort of pride in their physique and in a sort of like old archaic sort of strength sort of way, right? And we think that all of this ultimately is meant to distract the international community from having backlash towards these sorts of countries, right? When you're hazed over, and when the people within the country as well are hazed over from enjoying the sport, from enjoying the Olympics, that's when you are less likely to have dissent, right? Much like how Marx said that religion was an opioid of the masses, we think sports is the opioid of the masses in this scenario, right? We think that's what countries do to convince convince individuals to distract from their issues so that they never have to solve them. And in a few months, we return to all the issues, but the press is talking about something else, right? So for all these reasons, we've shown you why the Olympics ultimately detriments the people within these countries, why it detriments third world countries the most, and it's ultimately horrible overall. Thank you.
Cool. I thank the speaker for his speech, and I invite the second negating speaker to continue his case.
In this debate today, we have seen that the affirming team underestimate the benefits of tourism and mischaracterise the behaviour of people and countries on the world stage. They've also failed to sadly realise where the Olympics are held, not in countries like Kenya with serious authoritarian leaders, but in democracies like the United States, Greece, the UK, and Japan, and Brazil. So, they do not understand the long-term implications of the Olympics. Right, in my speech today, I am going to first respond to the material they've provided and some of the points of information which we believe are very harmful to their case. And also, I will then respond to the material and get into my speech. So, first of all, responding. When I made a POI about a serious issue to do with goodwill in North Korea, they laughed at it. It's not a laughing matter because international relations between North and South Korea have been something that is very cold and even fiery at times. We tell you that actually the cooperation between the two teams has allowed this ice to melt slightly go and is actually beginning to change the global scenario. North and South Korea have seen improving relations, which were only made worse by other factors, for example, the United States president getting in the way and making threatening actions. Look, we tell you that this is making real difference and actually tangible benefits. And without the Olympics, this would not be happening and we would not be having that here. Right, now, on to what they've delivered. They've given us a case that has to do with no real economic impacts. It is actually really harmful, and they've said that also it will harm new sports in some way. We don't understand this, and they've also said that it's a big farce. Right, on the first point, basically they said that there are no long-term economic impacts. They say, and they try and mitigate our arguments about tourism by saying that after the 3 weeks Olympics, how no one comes to the country anymore. They also say that the money does not trickle down to the people, it does not actually get spread around in the community, and it's not properly able to be used for anything like it. We tell you that is wrong for these following reasons. In terms of tourism, we have failed to understand that any publicity is good publicity. And when people see the Olympics in a country, that country will be more prominent in their minds. For example, the only reason people travel to countries like France is because they're really popular. But I'm sure if people learned about the Seychelles and it was more popular, for example, if they have the Olympics, I know it's a crazy example, but the point is that if they knew about it more, there'd be more tourism there. So we have those benefits and hurts. Secondly, actually, when you build the Olympics, you have to build a lot of infrastructure, even if you have existing infrastructure and stadiums. We tell you that this new infrastructure actually makes it more attractive. You have more business investment, and these businesses want to make sure they make more returns on their money. That's simply how capitalism works. They want to maximize their profits and income. So what they will do is promote and get tourists to come over. So we actually don't understand why they think there are no long-term benefits, because there are long-term benefits. You have the infrastructure there. As well as that, businesses are supported and they're better able to pay more people. And if the business is supported in the long term through higher levels of tourism, we actually see a big increase in the standard of living. And those people there were very thankful for the Olympics. So they've also said that the infrastructure bill, even if it is built, even if it's reused, it's too expensive. But we tell you that actually, because they like to talk about how many other sporting events there are and how amazing they are, how good they are to substitute for the Olympics, which we'll get into in a second, you'll actually be able to use those other stadiums for that thing. For example, in Tokyo, the Olympic Stadium was actually just refurbished based on existing ones. And the Olympic Stadium in London is now the head stadium for a major football club there. They've said that other sports competitions can replace the Olympics. There is nothing like the Olympics. There is no sporting event that has sports from every country and countries from all around the world that have a fair chance of competing. For example, the Rugby World Cup is one sport, and not every country is invited. For example, the US may compete, but it's not important to the Americans, the Rugby World Cup. It is not broadcast on NBC like the Olympics. Look, now they've talked, secondly, they have talked about the harms of the Olympics, and they've tried to put against a case that says it harms the people. But we tell you that actually, they tell us that actually there's going to be a lot of unused infrastructure, and the IOC has too much power in cancellation clauses issues. I already covered the infrastructure and how it can be reused and it can be repurposed to bring new benefits to the country. But they've also talked about the power that IOC has to standardise everything. Yes, of course they have the power to standardise everything. You need to have a standard sport that the most will compete in. And they talk about sports adapting, but you've got to remember, adapting sports is not always universal. For example, in this competition, that's why we use the world schools debating style. Other schools and other countries may use different styles, but we need one platform to be in this space. You need to regulate it. There is no way around it. Now, in terms of cancellation, if I recall correctly, the Olympics has only ever been cancelled twice in all of its history. Once in World War II, and once because of the coronavirus crisis. Mind you, this Olympics will quite likely go again. So actually, cancellation is such a negligible benefit. It's like dying in a plane crash. Most of the time, actually 99% of the time, the Olympics will go ahead and the countries will be able to reap their benefits. Finally, they talk about, second last, they talk about new sports. I don't get it. The Olympics is not some crafty arts festival. It's not a craft beer bar. It's a premier sporting organisation that needs to promote sports. And it's not true that only mainstream sports get promoted now. I mean, who has heard about water polo 3 years ago before it became a mainstream sport? It has become something that is quite new and has become on the wall. Lastly, they talk about distractions and performative things. We don't believe this is the case. When you have the Olympics in your country, there is more of a spotlight on your harms and injustices, and other countries can actually pressure you because they'll have more people Googling the country, speaking about the country, and there could be more controversy. One last thing, they've also said that there's corruption in the deals and the authoritarian leaders don't want to protect. Actually, the IOC is one of the least corrupt agencies in the Olympics because there are lots of members on the board and the votes are transparent. Small organisations they praise like FIFA are known and notorious for being corrupt. Ask the courts, they've proven it. Now, I was last to the point. The Olympics is good for competitors and viewers. Look, the Olympics, we tell you, is the pinnacle of sport. Yes, I'll take POI.
Yeah, sure. So does your side support what occurred in Brazil in terms of the Olympics?
Sorry?
Does your side support what occurred in Brazil in terms of the Olympics?
Yes, we support the Brazilian infrastructure in the Olympics. Look, the Olympics is the pinnacle of sport. It's the highest bar. People and countries want to be in that shield. It's like me standing in front of you all today. We're the centre of attention in the Olympics. Look, this is beneficial for a few reasons. Firstly, athletes will have something to look forward to. They have something to work for. There's no point in doing something if you have no end goal and something else. That also makes their home countries famous if they do succeed. That brings more attention to them, even if they're not hosting the Olympics. Maybe that could be for tourism or to solve the injustices that Affirmative wants to bring to you today. Secondly, viewers from their countries see their groups in the world stage. For example, Polynesians in New Zealand will see the successful Wahine Valerie Adams, and people from other countries will see people from their disadvantaged backgrounds become famous and beneficial. We think this is a benefit because it makes people feel better and it makes people more able to go out and be the best person they can be. It also means that people are more appreciative of other cultures. They learn more, they find them interesting, they might Google them and discover their food or their other actions and stuff. And that's great. The next thing is that it makes people more patriotic because they feel that their country can do a lot more. And what patriotism means in this sense, not in the fascist sense, that people will believe they can do a lot as a country and will do their best to go out in their communities and do that to make their countries earn more as a sort. But finally, it creates a sense of belonging and unity. Everyone knows what it's like to be in a team. I love my baby team. I want us to be winners, I want us to be great, and if you do that on a country scale, you can make great improvements as I said before. Look, at the end of this point, we have said that the Olympics only brings students that are linked to the Olympics. You see people getting together more, you see more patriotism, you see more representation of people. You wouldn't have this under this other house.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and I welcome the third speaker of the Affirmative team to conclude the substantive portion of her team's case.
Nate had to tell you today that there were significant benefits in the Olympic sports promoting a sense of patriotism within nations. We tell you that this patriotism that is promoted in nations as a result of sporting events is fundamentally predicated on a competition between nations, a competition that is fundamentally predicated on there being a clear winner and loser, on there being like this mega ultra competitive spirit fostered between nations. We think that that's really toxic and harmful to international diplomacy between nations, and exemplifies why we want today's event. So how are we going to win today's debate? We're going to be primarily telling you about how the economic impacts of having the Olympics is such a huge burden on the populations of nations, and how this should be like 100% alleviated from these populations. Well, secondly, we're also going to be telling you about the political ramifications of hosting or not hosting the Olympics, and why it's so much better to not have the Olympics. Finally, we'll be telling you about like minor sports and how they are affected as a result of pollution. Those are also going to get to be my 3 points of Clash. So under the first point of Clash, which is surrounding economics. 3 major questions under this point of Clash. Firstly, a structure is able to be reused. Secondly, is there any economic benefit of hosting? And finally, what are the unique harms of hosting 2 nations? So onto the first subpoint, right? On that surrounding whether structures are able to be reused. So the base material that they gave us in today's debate was to assert that we can't have seeing structures being reused in some parts of the world. We gave you 10 in terms of structural analysis as to why this sort of infrastructure of these huge stadiums, these highly specialized stadiums, as well as a multitude of hotels and accommodation areas, why all of these things wouldn't be able to sustainably exist. Gave you those mechanisms and that.
On that point,
they gave us an anecdote, right? We tell you that firstly, as part of a bid for hosting, a country necessarily needs to have the latest design and the state-of-the-art technology in the infrastructure in order to make it in order to appeal to the international Olympic committee, right? Having state-of-the-art technology is this huge burden that's placed on countries. We think that also means that all of these this infrastructure that they've built is going to be rendered obsolete after years, by the time they get around to maybe next hosting the Olympics if they do have, which means that they're not actually able to use these structures because they have become obsolete. But secondly, we tell you that it's just this huge scope in the amount of buildings and infrastructure that needs to be constructed, especially for the Olympics. Specialized stadiums for every sport, because every sport is unique and has its own specialized equipment, right? And also just a huge amount of hotels to account for the capacity of this huge coming flux of tourists, right? After the Olympics, we just don't think it's reasonable to expect that all of these hotels, or even a significant portion of these hotels and stadiums are still going to be used. We don't think that it's reasonable that the structures are still going to be able to be reused. This is a massive financial burden that the government passes down to its citizens in terms of taking things out of their education or healthcare budget, because the government isn't going to take it out of their own pockets because they're not convincing to do that. Secondly, is there any economic benefit of hosting? So as Nate's main question was to tell us about the benefits of tourism, right? Valentina already gave you 2 really good reasons why this is going to happen. Firstly, most people don't go back to a country after they have visited once. You're not going to go back to Brazil after you've already been. But secondly, there are probably structural barriers to tourism, right? If people aren't going there, if people weren't going to go there usually, it was probably a lot of instability, or having pretty high crime rates as well. These structural barriers are still going to exist. People aren't going to go back after the Olympics. But there are 2 more reasons why tourism is just rented, it's just a wash in today's day, right? Firstly, it's primarily rich areas that are being featured in the Olympics. Governments have an incentive to make their countries look really good, which means they concentrate these stadiums in rich areas. These rich areas don't need tourism, they're not promoting tourism. They only a very marginal benefit in capital. But secondly, Nate told you at second that it's not going to be King or Seychelles that hosting the Olympics. But we think that if this means that only developed countries are going to be likely to be hosting the Olympics, these developed countries are already countries that people go to. They're in the Olympics, people already know about them. They're already getting things on that, so they're not going to get a huge benefit from any marginal Olympics. Okay, in terms of unit costs, right? We told you down the line about the enormous risks of cancellation, right? Nate's main question was to tell us that it only happened twice, therefore it's not that relevant, right? We told you that because these risks are so incredibly impactful to the countries, just like the sheer severity of the financial burden that it places on countries, we think that twice is already too much. But we also tell you that because of the increasing globalization of today's world, we're probably going to be seeing like increased risks of these like, I don't know, pandemics or like other disasters or like disasters that affect the whole world. We think that this is going to keep occurring. We think that these risks are really bad. They have challenged us on why governments choose to host for reasons governments are short-lived, especially in developed or unstable nations. They don't really have the best interest of their people at heart for that. Secondly, the harms of like hosting atmosphere compared to the fact. Thirdly, the government is complacent to like cover up and make long-term social harms. So the outcomes of this backlash are that there are huge harms globally to like the people in these nations, right? It's like there's like ginormous burden to the population. But secondly, like all of these harms are like directly concentrated to the locals, like uprooting their lives and like kicking them out of businesses to like make space for hotels to be able to like host all of these like influx of tourists, right? The fact that like tourists, like locals can be uprooted out of their lives or like out of their jobs and have to like suffer financially as well as like physically because of that. Because of that, we think that this is like the most important point of today's debate. Like we don't think that any sort of like slight camaraderie between like nations is going to make up for the fact that like the populations are like the most vulnerable people of these nations are going to be suffering because of this. So to the second point of fact, which is that surrounding like political implications. So we think that the main thing this boils down to is whether like what implications there are on relations between nations. So our nature is going to tell you today that like relations between North and South Korea are improving. We tell you that like firstly, whether like the team is like winning or losing, the Olympics is like pretty arbitrary. We don't think that it's really like carries through like political diplomacy happening around that. But also like there are three reasons why like international relations are worse on their side of the house. Firstly, like this is clear win and loser, right? Like they told you that it would be like a heightened sense of patriotism. As I've already told you, this is actually really bad because it means that the winner and the loser are like definitely going to be like having animosity between them. Right? But secondly, like we already talked about first that this would be like exacerbated as by like media sensationalizing it, right? But the media has an incentive to like get clicks and like get people to be like angry about the content that they're reporting on. We think that the more they're willing to like take advantage of the animosity that's already present politically between nations and like so much of the world through like sporting events, trying to say, oh, like Pakistan also can be or something like that. This is really bad because it like makes tensions far worse between nations. And finally, like this is really bad because like having this like sporting camaraderie that exists at all means that other nations, as well as the like actual nations involved, are able to grow complacent about their deep-seated political problems by saying, oh, but we were friends with them at this sporting event. We don't really need to care about like these political ramifications. So we think that at best, like they can claim really marginal benefits that don't weigh up against like the huge harms they do to our population. But at worst, like they make these relations worse. We think we want to stay on those terms. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, I thank the speaker for her speech, and I invite the third and final speaker of the engaging team to conclude the substantive portion of the debate.
When we abolish the Olympics, we miss out on an abundance of unique benefits that AF has not been able to replace under their model. We win this debate today when we prove to you that the unique benefits that are held by the Olympics are incredibly important, and abolishing them means we miss out on a myriad of things that they simply cannot get under AF's side of the house. 2 points to flash you today. Firstly, the importance of the Olympics, and secondly, how international relations play into this. Let's jump into the first point, right? So what we heard from AF today was that there are no long-term economic benefits such as like tourism, right? They said the only benefits we get are really short-term for big cities. Secondly, they also told us that the facilities, like buildings and infrastructure that are built, are really expensive and just end up going to waste. Finally, they told us that small sports probably don't really matter that much and we shouldn't care about them unless they're big enough to have their own global event. Sorry, pause.
Oh, it's just, I'll do it. Oh, no.
Sorry, you're at 56 seconds.
Yeah, I'll just, it's on the, do you know what it is? It's on there.
Yeah, so what we heard from ACT today basically was that we don't get any long-term benefits of the Olympics, that everything is done around them essentially goes to waste. We don't get anything good out of it, and the small sports that might be benefited are really inconsequential. Now, what we tell you about this is that we have 6 responses today. Firstly, we tell you that countries actually do get better long-term benefits when they host the Olympics because there's an expectation of high quality, right? When people go into the Olympics, like to host it, there's an expectation that they're going to have really good facilities, that they're going to have infrastructure that's going to be able to cope. That's why these investments are made and are really good. This is good because it means tourists are inclined to keep coming back. Now, I've just tried to tell you that tourists probably don't care. They're going to go once and leave again. But what we tell you is that if they're there for like the Olympics, they might be inclined to come back and actually experience the cultural aspects of that country, or go around to other things, or tell their friends. We still tell you there's a really big sphere of tourism that can benefit from this happening, right? Secondly, even if this isn't good for tourists, we tell them improving the overall infrastructure of your country in the long term probably isn't a bad thing. Even if you don't generate tourists just from the popularity around the Olympics, the overall well-being of your country in the long term is probably improved when you better that infrastructure. That's something that is unique to our side of the house and doesn't happen on our side when they miss out on things like the Olympics. Secondly, even if we take at their best here and say that the only benefits we get are really short term while the Olympics actually happen, for example, in our cities where that's specifically being hosted, they get a small economic benefit. We tell you this is still a really huge boost for the economy of that town or city. That boost of tourism is really good. That boost of extra spending for those businesses in that town. That's really, really important. And that stuff we entirely miss out on our side of the house because they simply they just do not get it in the same way we do with the Olympics. When you have the Olympics, you have all of these small businesses, even if they are in the big city, we still think it's valid that they're being boosted through the Olympics, right? This money that they make, A, helps individuals, as Katie said in her first speech, it helps them to set up their livelihoods and remain at a good standard of living. Secondly, we think it just helps the communities overall because it pushes the good benefits that they have outside the sphere of the actual Olympics themselves, right? It pushes local tourist attractions, local delicacies, all of these good things that we miss out on if we don't host the Olympics, right? So why does this not happen under our side? On our side, we only have stuff like the Rugby World Cup or whatever that's always hosted in the same few countries, right? Really rich first world countries that don't have the same like cultural richness to offer, right? We think it's really important that we have that range. When you do that, you're exclusively limited to the first road, and we think that's a really big harm that happens under exercise caps. Secondly, on the economic part, thirdly on the economic part, we show that the money that's generated from these through tax, even if it is only short term, is really beneficial, right? They care a lot about, as they've told us, like schools in Brazil that are underfunded. When you host the Olympics, you get a huge boost in tax because you have like goods and services tax that people are paying for when they buy goods in your country. You're getting income tax from all these businesses that are being boosted, right? This money, as Travis said, can go back into welfare, can go back into education, and back into helping the people in that country. This is something really important that does not happen under outside the house. Now, next on this, what we tell you is the facilities that are built or like used for the Olympics are either A, pre-existing or built to be used again and again and again. Countries don't make these huge economic investments for no reason. It's like Travis told you, right? In countries like the UK and Japan, progress afterwards. For example, the football club, right? This ensures that we're actually creating like this good infrastructure that's really beneficial. This is good because like now local sports teams have a high quality place to practice that they wouldn't have otherwise had without the Olympics. That overall like sporting capabilities for that country individually are now like exponentially increased in a way that wouldn't happen under our side of the house because they now have these new exclusive facilities that they created. Now, fourthly on that, we tell you that the small sports that Ash brought up briefly that are highlighted in the Olympics, we tell you that those are still really important. What Ash tried to tell you is like stuff like pole vault and all that that's on in between the cricket and the soccer, it really doesn't matter. We don't really care about that much. Why would people watch the Olympics for it? What we tell you is that actually putting these sports like pole vault in between these really popular sports is actually really good for the reputation of that sport, right? It means they have the opportunities to grow and like become like globally spoken about codes. When you, like under X model, these like smaller, least well-known sports don't get any opportunity to go out and show their merits, right? You only have big things like the Rugby World Cup, you only have big things like cricket and football, and then the only things in the global sport, we lose out on this huge diversity of different sporting codes that might be like culturally important to particular countries, or just overall, we completely lose out on them because they now lose the platform to have them when we abolish the Olympics. What we tell you further on this is that the people who are watching the Olympics and watching these sports, it's really important for them to have these good role models and the diversity in the people and the codes that are participating. As I've already told you, when you get rid of the Olympics, you limit sporting really to the first world wealthy countries who can afford to send their players off to it. This means we get far less diversity, we get far less benefits for everyone all around, right? We tell you when we had all of these different countries competing, you see some really good role models, like as Trevor said, Dame Valerie Adams, like who's Polynesian, all these like young Polynesian girls have these really good role models that wouldn't, like they probably wouldn't otherwise have if they didn't have these like big codes like the Olympics broadcasting them. Like the women's rugby team, right? They're really only well known in New Zealand because of the Olympics, because they did really well there. Like even though they point as rugby is like a really big example, when you're a minority, like a woman or like someone of colour, you still miss out under their side. They give you no benefits that we've been able to give you here. Now finally, let's move on to the way that they completely ignore these benefits, right? When you have the Olympics, you have roles like Simone Biles, who's like a black woman, who's like a really great gymnast, right? She probably wouldn't have that platform without the Olympics. All of these like young black girls who've looked up to the passive influence would completely miss that out. Now let's quickly move on to the international relations part of this, right? We think probably what they told today is that like they don't really care about issues. They just want to like look good for the Olympics. What we tell you is that like if you had countries like Brazil, if the Olympics hadn't been hosted there, a lot of the issues that we've highlighted today probably wouldn't be highlighted at all. Right? You probably wouldn't know about them because we have not been exposed to them by going to the Olympics and actually looking at them. So in fact, on their side of the house, we probably get no discourse because no one knows about it. Whereas on our side, at least we've been here, we've seen it, we know it. We know to keep bringing this up in future issues. You simply do not get that under our side of the house. The global discourse that exists under our side, when you have this cultural inclusion and interaction within sports, is a far bigger benefit than actually trying to claim, and this is why we are proud to promote.
Do you want me to continue with the class? Yeah. Okay. We'll just hold off on the reply till the other reply speaker gets back. Service? We'll just hold off on the reply till the other speaker gets back. Yeah. So it is.
Have you ever seen those transparent exit signs that you think are transparent when you see the roof? Not these ones, but like on some things, and you think, how is it transparent if the exit is the right way around on both sides? Turns out there's actually a bit of foil in the middle that creates a mirror, so it appears transparent, so the ceiling is reflected. That's a bit of trivia for
It's not quiz night yet.
Water polo was originally, I'm trying to think, guys, they used to be playing on horses with barrels, so then you had barrels and horses to play.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. Take the speaker 4 her speech, and I invite the leader of the negating team to deliver his team's reply.
Ultimately, this debate has come down to whether the Olympics benefit people, countries, and societies. We have run a case that shows really clear long-term economic benefits, benefits to the people of the countries, and benefits to countries as a whole in our global community. We have shown to you today, panel, that the Olympics is a completely unique sporting event that transcends all other minor competitions and does a better job of uniting the world than even the United Nations. Look, Affirmative today has given you a case that says that there are no long-term benefits, that tourism lasts for a couple of weeks, and that somehow international relations and even little steps are to be laughed at. We tell you now that even the little steps between North and South Korea should not be laughed at because everything counts. Look, there were 2 points of clash that my first speaker outlined today. Firstly, who improves society, the economy, and people more, and how does this affect international relations? Look, on improving society more, we can win this debate because we have told you that the long-term benefits are actually there and outweigh any short-term costs, for example, monetary or land use and eminent domain. Look, the long-term benefits we have explained really clearly are that people will be attracted to the new infrastructure, the owners and stakeholders in the infrastructure will be able and willing to promote it so that they get more money. They say that people won't come back, but we remind the House that the Earth has 7 billion people, and you don't necessarily need people returning to sustain the tourist industry. And we've also said to you today that people have friends and they're willing to tell that. Look, the publicity that the Olympics brings to the country means that it's more forefront of people's minds and they may be willing to book a place because nearly every country in this world has really beautiful attractions. And if you think about the country, you're more inclined to look at those attractions. We've made that really clear in the debate today that the long-term tourist benefits exist. As well as that, the infrastructure lasts and can be reused, and it can be made to be affordable. You can sell tickets for the premier football games, and you can refurbish existing stadiums. It's up to countries to determine the cost, and in most cases, countries make the right decision. Tokyo, Japan has, and London, England has as well. Look, they are not being dilapidated, they are being used properly and better. They say that there's a single boost to tourism, but we tell you this is long term. We've explained, and that's why we believe we've won that point of clash in terms of economics. In terms of people seeing their leaders, look, we've stated how important it is in our first speech and in my speech that you need to have yourself represented, otherwise you feel demoralised. People will see their own races, their own countries, where they may feel that they're left behind because they live in a place like Africa, where the system works against them. They see their own people on the world stage in front of everyone else. They believe they can do it, and that drives them to do better. As well as this, they believe their countries can do well, and they're going to make that change at home because they know there is potential, and they want to unlock that because people are good and people can do great things. Look, we've also told you that this improves international relations in the next point of clash. To win on this point of clash, we need to say that the Olympics has a tangible benefit to global relations, and we believe that the tangible benefit to global relations is absolutely huge. There is no other universal sporting event like the Olympics that brings people together. We said North and South Korea were cooperating. They laughed at us, but we're telling you that this is important because it led to greater steps. It created a culture where these 2 countries could work together and that people believed that change was possible. And if the people believe that change is possible, even in the most authoritarian regimes, that can be because of pressure on the government. We've explained that really clearly. Look, at the end of this debate, we've actually proved to you that we see more benefits on the ground. We've explained that their long-term benefits are minimal, their long-term issues are minimal. And we said that our benefits and our reasons for the long-term benefits outweigh their reasons for the short-term. We've also explained to you that actually people will be more motivated to go out there and be the best they can be, and that makes benefits at home. We've also explained in this debate that countries will be benefited. When they're on the world stage, it's not a distraction. The news will cover it to death. They will see and they will pick up all the human rights abuses, all the undemocratic things in the countries, and it will be on the world stage. Ultimately, we've proven that the Olympics has benefited us, and we will see none of that on the affirmative side of the House. We are proud to oppose.
Amazing. I think this will be for a speak, and I invite the F reply leader to deliver the final speech of the debate.
take a look at what Nate wanted to stand for in today's debate. Brazil. Brazil. Where the Olympics were a distraction from like underinvestment in human rights abuses in areas like health and education. Brazil, when millions of low-income Brazilians flooded the streets in protest against those Olympics because they were materially making their lives worse. Brazil, where bulldozers literally swept through slums to clean it up before the international tourists arrived and got the wrong idea about Brazil. Brazil is exactly the type of developing nation that these Olympics are so destructive to. Brazil is the reason we should abolish the Olympics. Okay. Two questions. Firstly, on economics, then on like social and international implications. On this economic thing, we never got a clear conception from the about whether they wanted this to take place in the third world or kind of first world countries, and we think we like flip-flop a lot here. What was their main thrust? They told us that we're going to get like better tax pay, more publicity, and like the stadiums are going to be reused. On tax pay, we just say this pales in comparison to the vast indebtedness that these countries are going to be in. It's bad because these countries are vulnerable, they're developing. On publicity, they didn't engage with the COVID context in which this debate is taking place on. Tourism isn't like going to be like a long-term solution. There's immense uncertainty around it. Secondly, we already gave you like reasons down the line that people not wanting to revisit these places, people only going to these places for the Olympics, and the structural reasons that they don't actually remove. What that means is that you're not going to get this thriving tourism industry on their side of the house. That's really hard because that's what they want to do to their benefits on. Finally, they told us about reuse stadiums. The IOC demands that stadiums are like kept to a really high standard and then like bidding process because that's part of your appeal as a country. That means that 10 years ago, a 10-year-old stadium is never going to be good enough to host that thing. You never need to spend millions on things like refurbishing and these really specialist niche things that probably aren't going to be used because these sports aren't necessarily culturally important to these countries. But what did we tell them? We told you down the line about the impact of things like debt and how people are going to go into this, and that's really harmful to vulnerable nations. We told you about things like the necessity of one-upping each other and things like opening ceremonies, meaning that there's going to be like ballooning costs and then you're not going to be able to recoup those costs. We also told you about the Olympics serving as a distraction from valuable domestic and international scrutiny. They just said there's going to be more focus because this country's in the news. That's wrong. Because there's only going to be focus on things like opening ceremonies or where the tourists are. But secondly, why would China want to host the Olympics if it's going to increase scrutiny on its human rights abuses? We think that reverts itself. Okay. But even if you buy all their economic benefits, here's why they're not good. Because they're not going to be going to places like local businesses. These international tourists are staying in places like big hotels, these local communities. They're not going to get that investment because it's going somewhere else. They compare everyone else, so we get actual investment into health and education. Those are the things that drive economic growth. Because at the point you have a more educated population, you're not reliant on tourism that can be cancelled because of COVID. You're reliant on your workforce, on your people. That's so important. We win on economic implications. Now, on social and international implications. They told us that sports can solve international tensions. First, the systemic reasons for why North Korea and South Korea don't like each other, you don't solve those. But secondly, we tell you sports have a win-lose dichotomy, and you can use these sort of stoke nationalism. They can see that in their second speech where they talked about things like patriotism. That's really bad. But thirdly, this creates an illusion of cooperation that complacency is really negative. They also wanted to tell us about diversity in sports and getting a variety of sports on the world stage. We've told you down the line about how when these sports are best able to shine, when they're hosted, when they're the sole focus, hosted by a country who actually cares about that sport, that's going to be infinitely more impactful than just being aired at 3 a.m. because no one's going to watch it. At the end of today's debate, this international and social stuff isn't as important. These economic harms are really damaging to stand to the poor people of Brazil.
I'd like to thank both teams for the debate. I invite you to cross the floor and shake hands, and we'll all leave the room and leave the judges to it. Headed? We're still talking.